Hello, welcome back to At the Movies with QCTV. I'm your host, Seamus Burke. Joining me today are Winter Kuharski and Cory Lang. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to be doing a retrospective discussion on the Star Wars prequels. This is in honor of the new Obi-Wan Kenobi series that's coming to Disney+. That's sort of a follow-on to the prequel series. Also, the second film in this trilogy, Attack of the Clones, celebrated its 20th anniversary last week, which is hard for me to believe. So we are going to take a look and see sort of how these movies hold up to us 20 plus years later. All right, thank you so much for joining us. We're here to talk Star Wars prequels. And Cory, I think you have a little show and tell to get us kicked off here.
Yeah, well, I'm old, I guess, because I was in high school, I think senior when Attack of the Clones. You said 20 years?
Uh-huh.
Wow, that's depressing. Yeah, I have a lot of Star Wars things in my collection. I figured, just for the sake of time, I'd just bring one thing. Yeah, so this is the Legacy lightsaber from Galaxy's Edge, from Disney World. So obviously Disney, they're going to market it as Rey's lightsaber. We'll discard the opinions on that, but you know, it was Anakin's, right?
Yeah.
This was forged for Anakin, and then Obi-Wan gave it to Luke, so it's the Skywalker lightsaber. So I thought this would be a fitting item to bring.
I mentioned this beforehand. I got to do the Luke and look straight down the barrel, and just, you know. Just...
Yeah, so if you go to Galaxy's Edge, this is one of many that you can buy. And they market it as Rey's lightsaber because she was the last one to possess the lightsaber.
I guess I never realized how, like, in your brain, like, I know how large a lightsaber is when you hold it, but it has a lot of weight to it.
Yeah.
It feels so real holding this.
And from a tactile standpoint, I think it's the most awkward.
Yes.
Because if you look at Luke's from like Return of the Jedi, it's very simple. It's very much like more of a weapon. This looks more of like a tactile tool.
Yeah, like stuff on it.
Yeah, so you could probably pick this up on the mic. It makes sound effects. But yeah, I just thought this was kind of probably the most iconic lightsaber in the franchise. Putting your subjective opinions aside, I think we can probably all agree it's probably the most iconic. And Rey was the last one to possess this lightsaber. So figured I'd bring it in, but this was Anakin's original lightsabers.
Yep, it featured in this trilogy. So
it did indeed.
Just to set the groundwork for someone that might not remember, because there's been only a couple of Star Wars movies since this trilogy came out. The prequel trilogy is episodes 1, 2, and 3, The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. They came out in 99, 02, and 05. And they were all written and directed by George Lucas, which is a change from the original trilogy even, where George Lucas only wrote and directed the first one, heavily involved in the production of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. But this, he wanted to exercise basically almost complete creative control with this project and tell the story of how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. So I guess we'll start with Cory and work our way down. Cory, what are your memories of this trilogy? Do you have any, or your memories of Star Wars in general? How did you come to know these movies?
I just think the most interesting thing about these movies is the internet wasn't what it was when these movies came out. I think that's the most interesting topic for me personally because social media didn't exist. These were opinions that were shared mostly human to human or like, you know, in person. I think the internet had like some forums, some discussion websites, but it certainly wasn't what it was now. So, you know, I think the marketing took over for Phantom Menace. You just saw the trailers and they would quote like the positive reviews and stuff. So when I saw this movie, I very much had it in my head that this was an awesome movie. Phantom Menace specifically. In 99, I was in 9th grade and I thought Darth Maul was one of the coolest movie villains I'd ever seen. He was kind of like a silent antagonist, right? With the dual lightsaber blade. I still like Phantom Menace to this day. Just to summarize my comments quick, I've only seen Attack of the Clones once. Wow. And I remember disliking it very much. Aside from Sam Jackson as Mace Windu, who's awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
Episode 3, I saw that in Las Vegas in 2005 when I was 21. It was my first trip out there, and I still think that movie holds up. Those are just my brief summary comments right off the bat.
Excellent. Winter, how about you? How did you come to know this trilogy?
Excellent question. So the first one came out in 2099. Okay, 99. Okay, I couldn't remember if it was like 2000 or 99. Okay, so Star Wars for me. So in 1999, I was 8 years old, and my mom was a huge fan of the original series when it came out. So this was sort of her way to introduce her kids to this series that she loved. And I mean, there's like, I have photos of her dressed up as Princess Leia and all this stuff. And that was back when we didn't have the internet, like you were saying, the internet for like reference pictures, you know, for costumes. And if you wanted to, you know, base your costume off of a movie, you had to, you know, go to the theater a bunch of times or rent the video and watch it. And we'll talk about more of my costuming love later. But for me, it was really that first like big like epic continuation. I really like felt a part of like the bigger nerd community, if that makes sense, because it had this huge fan base already, and then my mom really hyped it up, and so we went and saw Phantom Menace in theaters, and I fell in love with it. And Star Wars has continued to be a big part of my like nerd love. Like I love many different fandoms. In general, I like nerdy things, but Star Wars, all three of the prequel movies, I absolutely loved them, and I'm so glad that we're talking about them on this show. Yeah.
So I'm even a little bit younger than both of you. I was 3 years old in 1999 when The Phantom Menace came out. So I didn't see that one when it came out. I came to Star Wars through my mom as well. She was a casual fan, and she's a big Yoda fan. She has a Yoda action figure on her desk that we gave her for Mother's Day probably 20 years ago. But she introduced us to the original trilogy on VHS tape. We watched those a ton, and then 2002 rolls around, so literally like exactly 20 years ago, Attack of the Clones, the second movie in the trilogy, comes out in theaters, and I was 6 or 7. And we saw it in IMAX, and it absolutely just blew my mind. And that's the movie where we had all the toys from that movie, all of the merchandise, like the Star Wars marketing to me. I'm always reminded of the Attack of the Clones marketing campaign because that was my first exposure. And then when Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005, I think I was 9. And it was one of the first PG-13 movies I saw in theaters, which is a really big deal for me.
Oh my gosh.
Because it was the first Star Wars to be PG-13.
Yeah, it was. That is true. I do remember.
And
I do remember that being a point, because, I mean, the originals, I mean, granted, ratings have changed on how we rate movies. I mean, movies that were PG in the past probably wouldn't be PG. Now they'd be PG-13. But yeah, I definitely remember that being like, oh, Star Wars goes dark.
It was kind of a big deal, too, because that was also the same year that the Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire came out, and that was the first Potter movie to go PG-13. So I felt like it was kind of a coming-of-age moment for me, Revenge of the Sith. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a big kid now, and I can see Revenge of the Sith in theaters. I remember being so excited, like the Scholastic Kids magazines that they'd give us at school had articles about Revenge of the Sith coming up, and that felt like that was the first movie that I remember truly being just so pumped up for. So these movies, famously, I'll say that they're not well loved by all fans. Certainly when they came out, especially the first two, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, were absolutely railroaded by critics. Revenge of the Sith got more mixed positive reviews. So what I kind of want to do is I rewatched these movies over the weekend to kind of get fresh eyes on them. I'm super nostalgic for them, but I wanted to sort of take a look at them each just for a couple minutes and talk about things that we like, things that hold up really well, and things that don't. So I guess let's start Phantom Menace. Anyone have any broad strokes thoughts on the one that started it all for the second time?
It's got a really good lightsaber scene at the end, the Duel of Fates. John Williams' music is absolutely killer, and it sounds like they're bringing that back for
I like
Obi-Wan.
Music and costumes are the things that I am going to talk about, but I'll let you finish. So, but yes, the music.
Yeah, That movie still gets a lot of heat, obviously, Phantom Menace. I think it's a lot of it is deserving so. Some wooden performances and some goofy dialogue. But I think overall, I think there's some really good things to love. Jar Jar Binks is an annoying character. I still think that to this day.
He doesn't hold up. I don't think he holds up as a character very well at all. Although what I noticed, well, first of all, the visual effect element of Jar Jar, he was one of the first, I think he was the first character to be a full CGI character, and people have said that Jar Jar walked so that Gollum could run.
Yes,
we could have Thanos and stuff like that because, and the effects on him look a little rubbery now, but for the time, it's unbelievable that they were able to create such a realistic-looking character. Now he is super annoying, and very little of what he actually says or does holds up to any sort of. If you're not 5 or 6, it's really annoying. But something that I noticed that I heard someone talking about earlier was that Jar Jar shows the goodness in Qui-Gon Jinn and sort of his. He's sort of what the Jedi should be, whereas Obi-Wan Kenobi is kind of what the Jedi are. Because Obi-Wan is dismissive of Jar Jar, he's dismissive of Anakin in this first movie in particular. And then Qui-Gon Jinn is always sort of looking to the lowest among him. He's trusting of Anakin. He takes Jar Jar in, even though he is probably a danger to everyone in this movie.
Yes, most definitely.
But it's interesting to see. I kind of see what Lucas was going for with that character. It just is not executed very well.
Yes.
And I do want to talk a little bit more about Qui-Gon because you mentioned he's a personal favorite of yours. Liam Neeson is very, very good in this movie. He kind of stands out. Him and Ewan McGregor kind of stand out as being the ones that can kind of punch through some of George Lucas's directing or probably lack thereof.
Yes.
So I want to hear about your love of Qui-Gon Jinn because I think you've got a unique perspective.
Of course, I just did want to touch on Jar Jar real quick. So when the movie came out, I was 8 years old, and I loved Jar Jar Binks because I was the target demographic for Jar Jar Binks. So like, I have that nostalgic love of Jar Jar, like knowing that at the time I was absolutely enamored with him, but now in retrospective I can be like, okay, yeah, like maybe not the best choice. But yeah, so Qui-Gon Jinn, for whatever reason, 8-year-old me just fell in love with Qui-Gon Jinn. I was convinced I was going to marry Liam Neeson. And when I love a character in a movie, I have to watch every single other movie that actor has been in to like satisfy my like media consumption. Liam Neeson isn't really in a lot of children-friendly movies.
Not really.
And so I really only had Phantom Menace to just continuously watch on repeat because that was like the only movie I could watch as a child with Liam Neeson in it. And so for Halloween, the year that Phantom Menace came out, I wasn't a Jedi for Halloween. I was Qui-Gon Jinn.
Nice.
For Halloween, and my mom made my costume. I don't know how long costumes from movies have been made into patterns that people can make at home. I don't know how long that industry has been around, but I know for sure, especially because of Padme's costumes, that like everybody wanted to be Queen Amidala for Halloween that year. Not me, I wanted to be Qui-Gon.
It is a pretty iconic look. And,
the hair and all of her costume changes. Like,
and
of course.
in a universe where this is also something that I heard the other day that stuck with me is that in a universe where people wear a lot of the same outfits all the time, it's incredible how many different outfits Padme gets, and all of them are so elaborate and gorgeous, and it speaks to the talent in the Lucasfilm 20th Century Fox team that made that come to life.
Most definitely.
Pretty spectacular.
And Star Wars has always kind of been the leader. You mentioned that Jar Jar Binks walked so Gollum could run. And I mean, some of the visual effects in even the original series, a lot of those were practical effects, especially with the
Starfighters?
Thank you, the Starfighters, like that big camera movement. I mean, the credits, that was all like
the title crawl is a practical effect.
Is a practical effect, and that it's this incredibly rich world, and that showcasing those elaborate costumes on screen was, I don't feel like technology really, like the cameras couldn't really. I mean, HD and 4K wasn't really a thing, but we were making these advancements in, computer-generated, Jar Jar Binks and everything, but all of those costumes, those were handmade.
There's actually
Every little stitch is like done by a person.
Yeah, and there's actually, this is something that gets overlooked a lot, is there's more practical effects in the prequels than there are in the originals. They're just happen to be buried under a lot of CG.
Yes.
Or not buried, I guess. They're augmented with a lot more CG. So it's actually kind of hard to tell what's what. But Phantom Menace is probably the best blend for me of practical sets. There's a lot of location shooting in that movie and CG. Some of the CG, especially in the later half of the film, when there's that big battle on the plains with the droids and the Gungans, does not hold up especially well. I could see George Lucas, if he was still involved, wanting to give that a little facelift. But for the most part, it's remarkable how well the effects hold up, and in the originals too. But digital effects tend to deteriorate more quickly and more obviously than practical effects, and it's just really impressive what they were able to achieve. And George Lucas, for his lack of acting direction, was incredible and on the cutting edge of all this technology, and that's partly, I think, why he decided to make these movies was as an excuse to play around with these incredible technologies that are so ubiquitous now. So I will say the Phantom Menace, great third act. One of the best action sequences in all of Star Wars is that lightsaber duel, and the space battle, which I had not thought twice about, is actually very good as well. Jake Lloyd as the young Anakin Skywalker is also not. I feel bad. He's a child.
Now this is pod racing.
Yeah, his performance doesn't stand up so much. But I don't blame him. I mostly blame George Lucas for basically not directing at all. He's sort of notorious for that, even in the original. He always would give the direction faster, more intense, and that was it. And it famously
can I have a little bit more director?
Right.
Please?
So it's too bad that Jake Lloyd got the heat that he did. Don't blame actors for bad performances. Don't blame anyone. Just move on with your life.
Right.
But he isn't able to cut through that. But that last space battle, what I was going to say is that looks great. The problem with that movie for me is that it just is so slow. It's a really long drag.
A lot of politics.
A lot of talking.
Yeah, a lot of talking.
I mean, I almost printed out the opening title crawl. I might put it up on screen while I do this, because it starts off with the words like, taxation of trade routes in the Outer Rim is causing diplomatic, and it's like, oh my Lord. And I actually do like that they set the scene and you sort of get a really clear understanding of what the rules of this pre-imperial world are. You get to see how it's different, and Lucas was trying to make a point about how bureaucracy can bog down democracy and how it can lead to bad things, which is very resonant in our modern world about nothing getting done to the point where violence happens. So it was a good point he was trying to make. It just was not quite so eloquently stated, and this movie it doesn't move. The pod race is cool for about 5 minutes, and then it goes on about 5 minutes longer. We'll get onto this in a little bit, but I think any action sequence in Attack of the Clones actually smokes anything besides that last lightsaber fight in this movie. So, any other thoughts on Episode 1 before we move on?
The music, Cory already mentioned it, phenomenal. John Williams, you can't beat that score. The brass,
started the trend of the big epic choirs, I think,
that
we would see in Lord of the Rings and a lot of movies from 300, from the early 2000s. It definitely
stuck in your head, viewers. You're welcome.
Don't get us demonetized.
I'm pretty sure
we can't monetize yet.
I would just say Ray Park as Darth Maul.
Yeah.
Is incredible. I think it's just a menacing character, no pun intended. Just that mysterious silent antagonist.
Incredible stunt performance.
He's just
too.
unbelievable and created a very iconic villain with Darth Maul.
It's amazing how iconic he is for how little screen time he has. And that's another thing that kind of just bugs me about this movie is they just don't use that character. And it's almost disappointing, especially when you look back at the marketing. It was so heavily built around Darth Maul. I won't get into this too much, but they do a lot of interesting stuff with him in the Clone Wars that sort of makes up for it. But it's still, I think, a failing of this movie that they had this great asset and just disposed of it immediately.
I almost disagree a little bit, because in hindsight, if you look back, whenever he shows up on screen, his presence is so unbelievable. Where it's just like, God, what is going on with this guy? and then that big reveal when his blade comes out.
Yeah.
It's just like,
That's,
you know.
it's one of the most iconic shots in all of Star Wars.
I think if George Lucas gave him a bunch of meaningless lines of dialogue, I think his impact would have been less for me personally.
Sure.
But
There is something to be said for this sort of imposing, sinister presence. He is sort of just a muscle to Darth Sidious's mind in this, whereas Darth Vader kind of gets to be a little bit of both. It's interesting, especially given where it goes in the next movie with how they take the villains. So let's move on to Attack of the Clones, Episode 2, 2002. This is set 10 years after, and I know, Cory, you haven't seen this one in a while, but I'm actually going to encourage you to revisit it because I think that this one, for me, people go back and forth on whether this one is the worst or Phantom Menace is the worst of the prequels. And for my money, this one is better in almost every way. It's certainly not a good movie. I don't think you can objectively say that it's a good movie. But I think that the stuff that works way better than the stuff that works in Phantom Menace. And there's stuff that is probably worse than anything in Phantom Menace, but there's less of it. So it's sort of a toss-up for me, but I tend to favor this one just because, as I mentioned, of my memories of it. Any thoughts from you two?
it's been a long time since I've seen it. And it's not that I hate the movie, I just haven't seen it in a long time. I remember not liking it. I remember his Hayden Christensen's braided little piece of hair and
Padawan braid there.
yeah.
To
And
be fair, Obi-Wan Kenobi has that in Phantom Menace
true.
too.
That's
but
I'm not knocking. It's just
a very early 2000s look with the spiky hair and the rat tail.
Right.
Not good.
I remember the special effects being incredible, and I will revisit it. You're totally right. I don't. This is the one I don't have much to say on.
It was kind of like it's the in between of two movies that I really like. So I wouldn't like say I hated it or anything, but it's the one when I do a rewatch of Star Wars movies, it's the one that I kind of like I'm on my phone on this, or at the same time, or like I'm doing something else when I'm watching.
You have it
Attack of
on
the
while
Clones.
you're vacuuming or making dinner.
Yeah, something like that. And what I do remember liking oddly was the creature design of that pit fight, and they're chained up and everything. I thought those creatures looked very interesting, and wanting to know more about Boba Fett and Kamino was super interesting. It feels very much a like stepping stone movie than like its own in its own right sort of thing. But yeah, I like with Cory where it's like I should have rewatched it this weekend. I'm for shame.
Especially with the new Boba Fett series, right? 'Cause there's a lot of ties back.
A lot of
movie.
which I really liked because they didn't just ignore. So the Boba. So I'm gonna do like a quick little 2-3 sentence review here. I think that the elements with Obi-Wan Kenobi are great, where he's following Jango Fett around. That's where we get young Boba Fett. He's trying to find out who created this clone army for the Republic, and who tried to assassinate Padme at the very beginning of the movie. And that stuff works really well, and that's a testament to Ewan McGregor in particular. He's sort of following these steps. He's kind of doing a little detective thing, which is something we haven't really seen in Star Wars before or since. So I admire the risk that he took with that, because I think it paid off. The other risk that George Lucas took in this movie that does not pay off at all is the romance between Anakin and Padme. And God bless Natalie Portman. She's such a talented actress.
so true.
And Hayden Christensen has been in other things that he's good in.
Yes.
This movie is not one of them, and it really, like what I was saying about the stuff that's in this being worse than the worst stuff in Phantom Menace, the romance is so bad.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating.
They have like anti-chemistry, the two actors.
Yes.
And again, I don't really blame them for that because they're both talented actors. It's just they had literally no direction. Probably just George Lucas behind the camera saying, okay, that was good. We'll add the performance in post.
Right.
And it is painful to watch these two try to get together. And I actually like the idea of Anakin Skywalker, his love and his attachment and his care for another person being the thing that turns him bad. And the way that that's handled effectively in this movie is when he kills all the sand people. because he is so enraged at the death of his mother, another person who meant a lot to him. Yeah, well, it's a 20-year-old movie. Sorry.
Statute of limitations.
Right, the statute of limitation has long expired on Attack of the Clones.
You're
Spoilers.
fine.
The scene where he's holding his dying mother in his arms and then goes into that blind rage. That's something I think that was missing from The Phantom Menace is he's a perfect little angel boy. And I kind of wish that we'd seen him do something for the right reasons that is the wrong thing to do.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we see in this movie where he kills all these sand people. Objectively, a horrific thing. Got some good memes out of the conversation scene that follows.
Yes,
though.
the sand. It's
And not just the men, but the women and the children.
children.
Not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
There's a lot of really, really bad dialogue in this
Yes.
movie. So it's kind of like, on one hand, you have this really interesting sort of detective story with Obi-Wan Kenobi, which show me that movie just by itself. And then on the other hand, you've got this terrible romance that's just not working. The last, it's bookended by two great action sequences. The very beginning, there's a speeder bike chase that looks like something out of Blade Runner with the sort of neon aesthetic of Coruscant at night. That's unbelievable. Like that was something that stuck out to me. That again, it's something I didn't think much about before I rewatched it, but it is an incredible sequence. Lucas's directing on that is stellar, and there's some hilarious Anakin and Obi-Wan banter.
I was gonna say, I'm just
They
make sure
have
that
good
I'm,
chemistry together.
Yes, to make sure I'm not conflating the movies in my head. That's the one where he jumps off the side.
Yes.
And he's like, oh, well, there we go. That's in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, he jumps off the side of a speeder and plunges like hundreds of stories
Okay,
down, and Obi-Wan
yes.
Kenobi just leans over and goes, "Oh, I hate it when he does that,"
when he does
which is just so funny.
Yeah,
It's like,
the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan, very well represented in that scene. And I think that it was a big ask for the audience to believe that from the first movie, it was this, obviously child. And yes, Natalie Portman and / Keira Knightley were, yes, teenagers, but we're supposed to then believe that Padme, who looks exactly the same,
yeah.
that we know the relationship is supposed to happen, but I felt so much better about the Anakin Obi-Wan relationship. Granted, they had 10 years to develop that relationship.
Yes.
That they should have spent way more time actually developing a believable relationship. And the one thing they really had to do, they just didn't.
Right, and the movie rides or dies on that chemistry between
Yes.
Anakin and Padme,
Yes.
and therefore it absolutely dies because it just doesn't work. However, I will say one amazing thing we got out of that romance was the musical motif Across the Stars,
Yes.
which if we can't play it here, but look that up online. It is one of John Williams' best pieces, period,
yes,
and it
yes.
often gets overlooked because it's attached to such a not fun part of this movie. It's a beautiful piece of music, and
really
John
is.
Williams is working overtime to make you feel like this is a romantic
Mm-hmm.
situation for these two. To circle back, you were talking about the arena scene and the creature design.
Mm-hmm.
That sequence is awesome, and for me as a kid, seeing all those Jedi fighting together, and I mean,
Just the mass, they just swarm the field, and there's lightsabers everywhere.
it's very it kind of feels devoid of real stakes to me, but it's so cool to watch. And it just makes me smile every time, because when I was a little kid, that was the scene. And then the scene that follows with the clones and the droids, the battle for Geonosis is unbelievable. And that's one of the first action sequences with armies that was fully done in CGI, and it's done so much better than Phantom Menace. They use a lot of smoke and particle effects to sort of hide some of the things that wouldn't age as well, and I think it holds up pretty well. One thing that is a little strange, though, is that in this movie, in Revenge of the Sith, there is not one single clone trooper costume made. All of them are 100% CGI.
Gosh, I did not know that.
Which is bizarre, and not once you go back, you can't unsee it.
Okay, now I'm not going to be able to unsee that.
So.
And I also want to give props to the child actor for Boba Fett. That moment of where he picks up Jango's helmet and just it's so sad.
There's a reason they called back to that a lot in the Book of Boba Fett.
Oh,
because
yes. Oh, yes.
It's pretty sad. Also, we haven't mentioned Christopher Lee as Count Dooku.
I meant to, as Count Dooku. He's in it for such a short amount of time.
is.
It's you have such incredible actors, Christopher Lee. and you kill him right away. Like, come on,
Well,
man.
so they don't kill him in this one. They kill him in the next one. But he is not a big presence in this
not
movie.
really, yeah.
And he's such an interesting character to me too, because he's a Jedi that turned to the dark side.
Because he trained Qui-Gon
Yes.
Jinn. Okay,
Yes,
he was
so-
Qui-Gon Jinn's.
So there's potential for a really interesting dynamic between him and Obi-Wan, and they sort of touch on this. There's a point where he says, if only Qui-Gon were here, he'd be on my side. And Obi-Wan says, Qui-Gon would never join you. And that would have been an interesting thing to explore, but they don't really have time for it in this movie. And then he is disposed of very quickly in episode 3.
Yeah.
Hayden cuts him in half, right?
Yeah. Scissors his head off
yeah,
with
yeah.
it's
Because he uses Dooku's lightsaber. Because
Yeah.
he gets Dooku on his knees and he has
yeah.
both
He beheads
lightsabers.
him, that's
and
right.
that's the line of do it.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
So let's move on then to Revenge of the Sith, since we're sort of going that way anyway. Like I said, this was the big hype movie for me as a kid. I was so excited to see this. I'm just going to start at the beginning and say that cold open with the space battle over Coruscant, all the way through to when they crash land the ship rescuing Palpatine, is one of the most exquisite action sequences in all of Star Wars. Like it's unbelievable how well those effects hold up. Like it's mind-blowing how well those effects hold up. 2005 CG doesn't always do it for me anymore, but it's incredible. There's one shot that's several minutes long. You're just following these ships and you never cut away from them. Great banter between Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Oh yes.
It's about 15 minutes of pure great Star Wars to kick off the movie. Do you guys have any big Revenge of the Sith takes, memories, thoughts?
I'll let Cory go first. I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, 2005, right? Yeah, I was 21 when that came out. We were actually in Vegas with some of my friends when we went and saw it. I loved it. Blew me away. I do still think it holds up quite well, actually. The space battle in the beginning is really well. That Yoda fight scene when he's hopping on the little pods. That little arena where they hold their little political meetings and stuff.
A little goofy, but it's fun. Like it holds up a little better because I think it's a little. It kind of knows that it's goofy at this point a little bit, but
it's very dark. The lava scene
Yes.
at the end, the transition to Darth Vader, all that stuff. I think that's the best of the three, in my opinion. That's the one that I revisit quite frequently.
It certainly is, in my opinion, too. And what I would say about the first two is they're bad movies with moments, whereas this is a good movie with problems. And so it sort of falls on the other side of that scale, where this is probably a good movie. It is a good movie, I think. Not a great one, but it certainly falls on the correct side of good bad. And there are still some things that drag it down, but not nearly to the extent of the previous two. And there's more actors who are able to break through. Hayden Christensen is way better in this movie than the previous. He still suffers a little bit at the hands of Lucas's writing, I think. Some of the lines that he is given are very, 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 very cheesy, and they work when you're James Earl Jones behind a mask.
Yes.
But they don't so much work when you have to see a human being say them. It just, you sort of lose that pulpiness that you kind of need to make that stuff work. Like the one scene where Anakin and Padme have a romantic conversation is like the worst scene in the movie, and it's unbelievable how that it still is not good. Any other Winter thoughts from you?
This is my favorite of the prequels. Once again, that soundtrack. Like honestly, I will just put on the soundtracks to all the Star Wars movies and just listen to them. The Battle on Mustafar, it incorporated themes from Duel of Fates, and it has this own just heart-wrenching sound to it. Once again, we can't play it on this show, but go look up the Battle of Mustafar music. This came out when I was a teenager. Of course, saw it opening day with my mom in theaters, and I have seen all the 7, 8, 9 as well, opening day in theaters. And there's so many emotions. I feel like I'm way more emotionally invested in this movie just because it made me just so sad. Like, yes, granted, in retrospect, I can there's, like you said, a good movie with problems, but as a 14-year-old, there hadn't really been a lot of media that I consumed that made my heart hurt, if that makes any sense at all. So it really just, I'm always going to love this movie, and it's always going to make me cry just a little bit every single time that I watch it. The music gets me, the love story, that it's just this culmination of all these things that I know that he's going to turn into Darth Vader. I know this is going to happen. I know that Padme is going to die, and all of these things. But man, it's you know what? Say what you want about this movie, but I really like this movie.
You can tell George Lucas was really on point with this movie.
Yeah.
He had a plan for these 3 movies. This was the build-up. You can definitely tell this is the one he's the most excited about.
It's by
and
far
it
the
shows.
most focused
Yeah,
story-wise.
right.
And the thing that I think it suffers from is that it moves through Anakin's story so quickly. And when he does turn, you kind of understand why, but it feels like he does kind of do a 180.
Yeah, it is a little fast.
And
it's like,
I think that's more a failing of the previous movies than this one, where they didn't set it up quite enough. And what they are sort of hinting at is that this is like the straw that breaks the camel's back for Anakin and the Jedi. And they in the animated Clone Wars show, they go into that in quite a bit more detail. That sort of, if you watch that show, it kind of makes this movie a little bit more understandable.
Yes.
But that's still a failing of the movie. You shouldn't have to rely on outside media to like
released,
fill in
15
logical gaps.
15 years later? When did Clone Wars come out?
If it was sporadically from 2008 until 2019.
Oh, okay, then it was kind of, okay,
Yeah.
because I was like, I thought they
But
just came out with a season. Okay.
But point being, you shouldn't have to. It does feel fast. Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor really steals the show in this. He knows what movie he's in 100% of the time. Even in The Rise of Skywalker. I don't like the plot things that he's involved with, but he as an actor is doing an incredible job and is having the time of his life. And then Ewan McGregor too. The reason I'm so excited to see this Obi-Wan Kenobi show is because of this movie specifically, because he is just great, especially at the end, talking about stuff that makes you want to cry. His speech to Anakin at the end.
You were my brother, Anakin.
Is
You were supposed to
gut-wrenching. And it's kind of sadistic that he just leaves him to burn alive, because if I were him, I would have just probably mercy killed Anakin at that point, but
It's like a deer on the side of the road.
Yeah,
that
we're
you
just like-
it's pretty horrible, and it kind of seems like this Obi-Wan Kenobi series is going to deal with sort of
his decision to not.
right, and sort of he seems like he's a bit tortured by what went down, as you would.
bit?
It's an interesting thing to explore, and it's set up very well by this movie. Not that this movie was trying to set up for a Disney Plus series a decade and a half later, but. That's why people wanted him back so bad, is because of this movie specifically.
Yes. And I'm
I
so
think.
glad that they are bringing Ewan McGregor back, because his performance was, I mean, I just love Ewan McGregor. This past weekend saw the Moulin Rouge musical, and he's in the movies. I love Ewan McGregor.
He looks like he hasn't aged.
He really has not.
He looks the same.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that they joke that this is set. The Obi-Wan series is set 10-ish years after, almost in real time after Revenge of the Sith, and then there's another.
It's between him and
8
Alec
years
Guinness.
for him to get to Alec Guinness,
Yes.
and people are like, "What happened in those 8
those
years
8 years?
to weather him that much?" It's just they had the unfortunate casting decision of just a guy who was a little bit too handsome, but. Aged a little too gracefully.
Because it's age-wise, they're not horribly because
they're
Alec
really
Guinness
not.
was, I don't think he was, but yeah, but it's like numbers-wise, they're
not that far.
they're
apart
not
in
that far
age.
apart,
Yeah.
but looks-wise, it's Ewan McGregor is just too handsome.
I think people got older faster back.
You know what? That is very
People
possible.
smoked more.
Yeah,
that
is
doesn't
true.
help.
That is true.
And anyway, any final thoughts on this trilogy here before we wrap up?
Episode 3 is my favorite. It's the darkest one.
Yeah.
I think it's just George Lucas on point on that one. And Rogue One is my favorite Star Wars movie ever. That's all I'm going to say.
Rogue One is
It's the
pretty
best
good.
Star Wars movie. That's my hot take.
That's a hot take we have to come back to another time.
Yeah.
I didn't like
That's
Rogue One when I
interesting.
saw it, but then I watched it again and I was like, oh no, I really like Rogue One. For me, I think they were released at exactly the right time for me to fall in love with them. And, Jar Jar Binks, target demographic, loved them. They will always be nostalgic to me. Like I said, kind of kicked off my greater community presence of nerddom, and will always hold a special place in my heart.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll say about Attack of the Clones is we were in the middle of like the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy.
yeah.
So I was a senior
I
in
didn't
high
want
school.
to
I'm
bring it
like,
up because I'm like, that's my
know,
favorite, and I could talk about it for hours. But
yeah, so
Doesn't quite hold a candle to the. You look at the middle chapters
Right.
of those trilogies, and one
Right.
kind of kicks the other in the.
yeah.
in the
But I'll go back and
tail.
watch. I'll go back and rewatch episode 2.
Well, thanks for chatting with me, guys. I agree that these, because of how old I was, they hold a special place in my heart. I fully understand why these are not the most beloved. It'll be interesting to see with the sequel trilogy in 10 years' time, what the kids who are 9, 10, 11 in the last 5 years will think about them and how those will hold up over time. So
Also, I think George
Interest-
Lucas was lucky that social media didn't exist when these movies came out.
yeah.
He would have been shredded even 10 times worse than he was.
And
without
it's
it.
nice that Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor have talked about this in Obi-Wan Kenobi press, is that it's nice that the people who liked those movies as a kid are talking now, because they're sort of getting their roses retroactively for, like I said, bad movies with moments and good movies with problems, but they still deserve credit for the
Yes, most
enjoyment that they brought to those people, and I'm glad that they're getting it now. So thank you guys for joining us, and I think we'll wrap it up here.
Sounds good.
Join us next time for more movie discussion. Not sure what we'll be doing yet, but we'll figure something out. The Post is live at 2 o'clock on Wednesdays, and be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts. You can see that on a graphic here now. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.